I've already seen that motion.
I see.
It will serve on the 26th of September.
Ah, wow. Yes. Is that breaking news or?
During the course of August, however, things seem to have changed. Mr. Mashaba started launching attacks on the coalition and the DA. It was an easy decision.
Sure.
To step into a coalition essentially with the ANC. But there was a strong feeling that if we don't do that, it would force the ANC to conclude some kind of an arrangement, either with the EFF or with MK or with both of them. What's the headline going to be? Beleaguered DA mayor wants to be the leader.
Mayor Brink, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX.
Great pleasure to chat to you.
So we know about your time as a very young MMC in Parliament, but less is known about your life before then. Tell us a bit about your upbringing and what interested you in politics.
So I grew up in a small town called Palabora, right at the gate of the Kruger National Park. And my interest in politics, I suppose, it was quite, a precocious thing. It's a sense of having this strange interest in something at an early point in one's life. And I suppose it was the 1999 election, reading up on what's happening and just getting this feel for it. And at school, I was the guy doing the public speaking things and the debating.
One of those, huh?
Writing letters to the newspaper, because when you live in Palabora, where the newspaper used to come at 1 o'clock, you've got to try to participate in some way. So I also remember my folks talking to me about fairly grown-up things early in my life, including, interestingly, at that point, the constitutional negotiations at Cadessa and the whatever else they called it, and the first Gulf War. So those discussions and my parents talking about that was early formative memories, and I suppose that's how my interest in politics started.
And joining the DA, talk us through that journey and how you came to decide that the DA was the right vehicle for expressing your particular views.
I was actually quite critical of the DA and of Tony Leon at that stage. And
Right.
And I had an occasion to meet him once. It was actually a high school girlfriend's uncle who had gone to university.
Wow.
With Tony.
Yeah.
And the uncle was sort of a Marxist at university, and Tony was more of a classical liberal. And it was very interesting, and I came to realize that what I essentially believe in is a society that allows the individual to reach their full potential, whether that is by securing his or her freedom or by enabling them to achieve certain things by proactively creating opportunities. Sure. So philosophically, even though I might not have liked at a particular point the style of the DP and the DA, philosophically I came to realize that this is what is closest to what I believe in, my worldview. And at university, I sort of banded together with a few other folks, and we started the first branch of the DA Students Organization at the University of Pretoria. Wow. Studied law. Was always more of a political student than a law student.
Interesting.
And in 2011, I was elected to the city council as quite young.
Incredible. Yeah. How old were you then? Must have been really young.
23. I think 23.
Wow.
Quite young. Probably too young. But when you're young and idealistic, you just want to jump in and make a difference. At that point, I was still sort of doing my articles, which I never finished. Wrote the admission exam, but I never finished that.
You and President Ramaphosa, hey?
Sorry?
You and President Ramaphosa share that.
Yeah. So I just later was admitted as an advocate, but was I never did the admission process and so forth.
Okay. Wow.
And then I had a business, paint contracting business, paint retail business on the side. You study law and you end up doing other things. And in 2016, the DA became the biggest party in the city of Tshwane. Salim Simanga was elected as the mayor. And at that point, there was sort of a fork in the road, because I was quite ready to go into a legal career, do something at the bar, and then Salim Samanga phones and says, don't you want to be the MMC for corporate and shared services? And I made that critical decision to go into that.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up in politics.
And you're in your late 20s at that point.
I was in my late 20s at that point. I was 28, 29.
The study of law, even though you never practiced, how has that influenced your understanding of governance, and in what ways does it infuse your role as mayor?
I would say it's more practical, because the law teaches you to consume a big volume of information and then to extract from that what is the most consequential. And with that ability in politics, it's very helpful. Even when you start studying financial reports and so forth, you always ask yourself, what is the 10 or 20% of information in this big pile of documents that is most consequential to the decision or the choice that now needs to be made? What is the headline that this gives you? And I think that is what the study of law, it's a certain method of thinking, but I don't think legal study in itself philosophically had much effect on my politics.
You seem to be quite interested in philosophy. I saw you in another interview citing Fukuyama and going
With Ernst.
Yeah, citing chapter and verse. Are you interested in philosophy as well?
I'm quite interested in it. I can't say that I've dug too deeply, but for instance, Fukuyama's theory of the authority of the state, how do you get to a point of having a prosperous society where individuals and communities can reach their full potential? I mean, that's very, very important to understand in our context. And, we are now at the point of being a democracy, so we can't reverse engineer the process of how we came here. Of course, we must have a deep and abiding appreciation for what happened before. But the key question is, what do we do in the future business? What do we do in order to reach a certain level of human development and opportunity in this country? And that I'm quite passionate about.
For sure. Well, you've certainly not experienced a, shall we say, calm term of office. A few months in, I think we had the cholera outbreak. And of course, there have been various attempts to remove you from office. Meanwhile, you've been on a road to really strengthening the finances of the city and making service delivery gains. I wonder, firstly, what you made of this attempt, this recent botched attempt to remove you from office, and whether you were taken by surprise by particularly ActionSA's involvement in it.
So let's take it back to why Tshwane was quite unique compared to, for instance, Ekurhuleni and Johannesburg. It's that here we had the three ingredients for a successful coalition, in the sense of, one, our parties had a majority. In Joburg and Ekurhuleni, Mpofu-Walsh and Tanya Campbell, they didn't have a majority and they couldn't put a majority together.
Sure.
But at the outset, 2021, we had a majority, very slim majority, but still. And that's important in a city council because the mayor cannot make certain key decisions on his own.
Yeah.
Appointment of a municipal manager, passing of a budget,
Sure.
raising of a long-term loan, and so forth.
Can you just clarify the balance? Because a lot of people don't know the exact balance. So it's the DA is, obviously the biggest partner in this. And then you've got ActionSA, which is a relatively large partner. And then Freedom Front Plus and a few other smaller parties.
So the DA has got 69 seats.
Sure.
ActionSA has got 19, Freedom Front Plus 17, ACDP 2, IFP 1, and then an additional coalition partner that came along later, the Defenders of the People 1.
Right. And 108 is the magic number.
108 is the magic number to make all of those consequential decisions.
Sure.
So in my experience also from Tshwane back in 2016, the second important ingredient of a successful coalition is broad ideological coherence. I mean, you can't have a fundamentally different worldview or set of policies. It must be broadly reconcilable. And then lastly, having people of integrity at the decision-making table. The personalities and why they are there can be exceptionally consequential.
Sure.
So are you there to bargain for tenders, for positions, for favors, patronage politics, or personality, or are you there to advance a particular agenda for your constituency or policy points? I believe we had all three of that. And in July, after this election, which obviously the multi-party charter that the Democratic Alliance was part of could not reach a majority in Gauteng or nationally, things changed. The formation of Government of National Unity. And then during the course of July, ActionSA reached this agreement with the ANC in Johannesburg, which essentially was to dilute the influence of the EFF in that coalition. The EFF had voted against a loan. In Ekurhuleni, the ANC mayor had kicked out the EFF MMC for finance. And my first call was to Nasipi Moya, ActionSA deputy mayor in the city of Tshwane. I said to her, Nasipi, I see this deal between ActionSA and the ANC in Johannesburg. Will it have negative consequences for our coalition in Tshwane?
Yeah.
Because I do also see part of this agreement is that the ANC will help ActionSA to get the speaker position in Tshwane, although that is part of the existing coalition agreement. That's not against the coalition agreement. And at that point, Nasipi said to me, don't worry, this won't affect our coalition. They know we're doing well. They know there's strong leadership. There's good relationships. Then at the end of July, we faced a motion of no confidence. At that point, the coalition was rock solid. ActionSA issued their own press statement in which they said this is opportunistic. And they pointed to the success of the coalition, also rightly claiming part of that for themselves, because that's what coalition partners do.
Sure.
During the course of August, however, things seem to have changed. Mr. Mashaba started launching attacks on the coalition and the DA, bringing up all of this old historical grievances from years ago. And then it became evident also explicitly, the leaders of ActionSA said, we are negotiating with the ANC to bring down the existing coalition. And that was quite a shock, because up until that point, you would expect trouble to announce itself in advance. So serious differences in personality, disputes that couldn't be resolved, events that point to deterioration. None of that happened in Tshwane.
Right.
And so the crisp answer to your question is yes, it was quite surprising.
And you staved off this motion, and it seems to me, having had a look at the founding affidavit, that it was really procedurally unripe. And just there were a chapter of accidents in the way that it was brought. Do you want to talk us through how effectively bringing that application has at least delayed the motion?
Yeah, it's certainly a delay. It doesn't exclude it permanently, because I am a Democrat. I have to face a motion of no confidence if it is brought with sufficient notice, and that was the argument.
Sure.
So a successful motion of no confidence removes the mayor, but also removes the mayoral committee. It's got a very disruptive effect on government. And if you essentially have 2 days notice, then that is insufficient. And I think the concession from the office of the speaker was, you're right, and there was a commitment that those motions wouldn't serve, but it is temporary.
So we're looking at potentially around the end of this month, another motion, if it's going to be brought, would be brought.
I've already seen that motion.
I see.
It will serve on the 26th of September.
Ah, wow.
Yes.
Is that breaking news or?
I don't think it's breaking
news. Not quite breaking, but kind of close. Okay,
yes.
So 26th of September, another motion will be brought. And before we get into that, because I mean, what will happen, and it's hard to predict. I mean, what's your relationship with the deputy mayor like? Because she's an ActionSA deputy mayor, part of this coalition. You have to work together, but on the other hand, ActionSA outside of Tshwane seems to be at least in two minds about whether to remove you as mayor. Has that caused tension, or have you actually managed to steady the ship despite the differences between the parties?
So we have had an excellent relationship. Again, no differences of personality. Our way of working complements each other. I think she's a valuable member of the team. And immediately as we started working, she was elected in January, I thought to myself, whatever the The political calculations might have been to bring in a deputy mayor. We are going to work well together. But that relationship inevitably has come under strain because of statements by Mr. Mashaba and other ActionSA leaders. And the problem you have with that party is, you can sit next to the deputy mayor and you can ask her, as I did sitting in that council meeting when Jackie Matabate, the caucus leader, stepped outside and said to the journalist, "This coalition is over. We've decided to withdraw." Literally what happened in a council meeting. So I'm sitting next to the deputy mayor, sort of, "CP, have we got confirmation? Are you withdrawing?" And she's like, "I'm not certain. I haven't heard anything. But if the caucus leaders..." So the problem is that internally ActionSA has got an issue with the legitimacy of the local structures because they haven't had any elective congresses. The caucus leader is appointed by the party leader, the deputy mayor is appointed by the party leader. And inevitably then there are problems in, do the people at the decision-making table have the authority to say, "Listen, this coalition is working. We are implementing our agenda. Please, national leadership, stay out of Tshwane." If you don't have that kind of authority at a local level, then anything could happen. Mr. Mashaba could decide on a Tuesday afternoon that, he's so angry at the DA, he will bring us down, bring down a DA mayor in the city of Tshwane. And that has got massive implications. But the internal checks, the local democracy just simply doesn't exist in ActionSA.
Sam, I just wanted to interrupt this episode to let you know the 4 ways you can help SMWX. Way number 1, you can invite me to speak at your institution or company. Way number 2, you can advertise on this channel. Way number 3, you can become a member of this channel. The link to the membership is down below. And number 4, you can buy merch, that's books or hoodies. Now let's get back to the episode. All our contact details are in the description box below. ActionSA seems wounded. We had Mr. Mashaba on the channel, and it seems to me that he feels wounded from the 2016 onwards experience, but then doubly wounded because of the way that the Multiparty Charter panned out, and he feels that it was a betrayal for the DA to partner nationally with the ANC. Do you think there's some validity to ActionSA's feeling that this deal with the ANC was a betrayal of Multiparty Charter partners? Or do you think that that's being naive?
So the purpose of the Multiparty Charter was to gain a majority either in Gauteng, where it was realistic, KwaZulu-Natal, or nationally, or both. And it was described as a moonshot because it was a very ambitious goal. And I believe the Democratic Alliance and the other parties certainly gave credibility to that multi-party charter. It was in our election advertisements. It was in our offer. We took hands. We developed joint policy positions. But in the end, the ultimate test in politics is, can you win a majority? And unfortunately, we couldn't do that in Gauteng. We couldn't do that nationally. We couldn't do that anywhere. So we as a party had to make a decision. Given the election results, the people have spoken. What are the possibilities? And a critical decision was made, which wasn't an easy decision.
Sure.
To step into a coalition essentially with the ANC. But there was a strong feeling that if we don't do that, it would force the ANC to conclude some kind of an arrangement, either with the EFF or with MK or with both of them. Which in our assessment, those parties are anti-constitutionalist. They certainly don't share our values. And if the test for this country is to grow economically, to lift people out of poverty, to get development going again, then that would be a disastrous option for the country. Mr. Mashaba, in addition to being angry about missing the GNU bus, I think also blames the DA for ActionSA's poor performance. And I think that is really unfair from his side. He had to take responsibility for leading the party, for owning the issues, for driving the campaign. And quite frankly, and I'm careful not to take this too far, he wasn't very prominent in that election campaign. You know? And so political parties go through ups and downs, and they must take responsibility and do introspection. But to blame the Democratic Alliance, to say, oh no, you know, it was our plan to do a thing with the ANC at the outset, that is fundamentally unfair.
There's a fascinating situation emerging on the national and then provincial levels in Gauteng, which is quite paradoxical, where you've got this national agreement which has failed to take hold yet in Gauteng. And so, you know, I wonder whether you feel as if the national agreement has in some ways been prepared to sacrifice Tshwane, because it would seem to me that there should be some leverage at the national level to say, don't touch Tshwane, or can we take this to Tshwane? Otherwise, we have some national leverage. What do you make of that? Because the DA does have some power to protect your position. Many people feel you're doing a good job. I'm one of them, actually. Do you think that national should push harder?
So it's quite a difficult one, because making the argument, you know, put a condition there that unless you keep the current coalition in Tshwane, we're going to withdraw from the government of national unity, with all the implications of that. Yeah. I think that would be unfair to expect.
Sure.
There were also very concerted efforts to do something in Gauteng, and it failed. It really, there was an effort to do it. And I don't think pinning the survival of the government of national unity to us staying in power in Tshwane would be fair to the country.
Sure.
At the same time, I do think the government of national unity has an interest in our metros being well governed, having a clear sense of responsibility, not having the kind of confusion of policy and bizarre statements that have been made in Johannesburg and elsewhere. Just to have a sense of, yes, things are difficult, but we are coping with them, we're making progress. I think that's in the interest of the government of national unity. We have the union buildings just down the street here, so this is an important city. But the discussions that we have had with the ANC at national and provincial level, or at least my party leaders have had, Salim Simanga, Gauteng, and Helen Ziller, as chairperson of the federal executive nationally, was some kind of a stability arrangement where we don't bring motions of no confidence in, say, Ekurhuleni or Mogale City, and then they don't bring motions of no confidence in the city of Tshwane.
Yeah.
I cannot comment on the progress of those discussions because they're ongoing, but we'll have to see what the counter offer is to that. What you have to understand is, in Gauteng, the ANC is a very complicated organization.
To say the least.
Say the least. So, I mean, you've got Premier Lesufi and his faction, and they seem to be somewhat unwilling to accommodate the DA. But then you get other regional formations who might feel differently. And it can't be for us to tell the ANC how to manage that. We will have to see what the possibilities are. And maybe some kind of a settlement can be reached, but it's too early to say, even though I face a motion of no confidence at the end of this month.
Yeah. And if that motion succeeds, of course, then you continue. If it doesn't, then where to after that? So
the relationship with ActionSA has taken a lot of strain. Here we had a government that was working, we were making progress, and suddenly they turn on us. And even now, the deputy mayor, who I've got this excellent relationship with, is attacking colleagues and so on, obviously under pressure from the leadership of her party. So it's going to be incredibly difficult to put that relationship back together. I think if you speak to other folks, they'll tell you, I don't fit into this mold that people often make for DA politicians of arrogant or, big ego, whatever. So I can take criticism. The sense that I just have is the unfairness of the conduct. So why don't you use internal coalition processes to address issues? Why do you just come out of the blue and say this is over and then start attacking your partners while taking credit for what has gone right? So the relationship is strained, but I think even at this late stage, ActionSA can make a commitment and say, we will not support a motion of no confidence. We have the following grievance. We'll use coalition processes. But a statement to that effect is not going to be enough. We're going to need something extra. Throughout the course of all of this drama, I've reached out to Michael Beaumont, the national chairperson of ActionSA, and the person to whom Mr. Mashaba has delegated a great deal of the management of the coalitions. And at one point, he just stopped responding to my messages. So it's very difficult to see how this relationship is going to be repaired. And even if ActionSA says, okay, no, we're coming back, we'll try and make it work, we might still need to have a discussion with the ANC in respect of a stability arrangement, because it's certainly not in Tshwane's interest to keep on changing executive mayors. It's certainly not in Ekurhulene's interest to have the threat of motions of no confidence and so on.
Yeah. So do you think that there may be a prospect for a conversation across the aisle with the ANC even here that maybe combines national and local feelings but bypasses some of the provincial feelings?
Well, it will depend, because we don't get to choose who we speak to in the ANC. They're an organization with their own structures, their own leaders, their own mandate, their own processes. And the last thing I would want to do is to get involved in some manipulative game where I'm, trying to figure out who's in whose faction. So when we speak to the ANC, it will be up to their National Executive Committee, their provincial structures and so forth. Interestingly, despite the motions of no confidence, I've always had a fairly good relationship with the local ANC. When I was elected mayor, I said very clearly, we might have our differences, but we can't hate each other. We have to love the city. And so I have had regular engagements with the ANC about council agendas, about, this is our reasoning on this budget item or on this council item. And I'm very happy to speak to them. The test, however, is going to be, will we be able to govern in a way that improves the administration, that doesn't let the door open for corruption, and that steadily improves service delivery in the city to our residents.
Yeah. I mean, the decision to create conditions for waste contractors seems to have irked the ANC to the extent that it seems that there's some kind of financial interest in keeping this old system where it's not clear whether the waste has been picked up or not, and you can't track it. And one does worry that there's some kind of deeper, potentially corrupt situation in which that decision has precipitated the very fast move for your removal. Do you think there's any?
There was certainly a concern. There was certainly a concern about that. The 3 conditions we put in for waste removal contractors, really not revolutionary stuff. Have your trucks fitted with tracking devices, so if you bring your invoices, we know you're working in Tshwane and not some other place. Make sure that the e-NATIS documentation on the vehicle corresponds. And interestingly, that when we did the vetting, apparently they discovered one of the vehicles that had been given as a waste removal truck was in fact a 1400 Nissan Bakkie.
Wow.
And when township streets are dirty and so forth, when you see there are breakages in your waste collection, that's the sort of explanation that clarifies things. And the last was that these trucks couldn't be older than 9 years. We benchmarked with Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni. They've got 5 years and 4 years, and that's simply an indicator of reliability.
Sure.
But understand that if a truck breaks down, you miss a weekly bin collection, then in many communities, folks think the municipality isn't coming this week, and then they dispose of that waste on their own. And that's how public spaces become dirty, aside from informal settlements and so forth that are unserviced. And there was a real concern, given a conversation that happened between the MMC for Finance and the regional secretary, the ANC in Tshwane, that there were direct interests here that were being pushed against. The explanation that the ANC gave was when they had their regional Lekgotla, these waste removal contractors and subcontractors burst in there, seeing the ANC as the natural advocate for the interests of small black-owned businesses to champion their cause. And it's at that point that an angry conversation was had with the MMC for Finance. It was completely baffled by, all of this came out of the blue. So we've got to keep our eye on those kinds of things. And the essence of it is, if you want to say township streets in particular, because these are vulnerable communities, they are further from the center, they're dirty, parks are dirty, they're neglected, then you must be able to make the tough decisions that puts contractors and subcontractors who are responsible for that situation on terms. And we'll have to be very, very careful to see that we don't subject the best interests of the people to the best interests of folks who happen to do business with government.
The DA has been in leadership of Tshwane for nearly 10 years now, barring a brief interlude with Mr. Makwarela. What do you say to the criticism that perhaps in the Western Cape there has been a real difference in government, but the DA difference that you refer to, and I appreciate you've only been mayor for a year, hasn't descended on Tshwane as maybe some of its voters would have hoped, and that there is a legitimate criticism of a slow pace of service delivery over a long period in Tshwane?
The key difference, obviously, between Tshwane and the city of Cape Town is in Cape Town, you had a DA majority. And that is very consequential for local government. At the start of our interview, I pointed out all of the key things that require a council majority in order to get done. And if you think about it, for 16 years since its inception and for some time before this entity called the City of Tshwane was actually formed, you had an ANC dominant party democracy in the city. And what the ANC essentially did was to create the municipal administration in its own image. It's a party that believes in a unity, or at least theoretically believes in the unity between party and state. And now you get a coalition in 2016 where the coalition itself doesn't have a majority, and you've got to negotiate with the ANC or the EFF to get key things done. The end of that term of office was ANC and EFF councillors walking out of council meetings, collapsing them, and that invited the Gauteng provincial government to dissolve the city council for a period of 7 months. And it wasn't just any 7 months, it was the 7 months that coincided with the COVID-19 lockdown. For 7 months, you didn't have any oversight of procurement, of hiring, of critical decisions. Prior to that period of time, the city had an operating surplus of more than 200 million. Afterwards, it had an operating deficit of 4 billion. Now that has real consequences. And while you can say, okay, but you've had a DA mayor, or you've had a series of DA mayors, the power and the instability can't be pointed to one political party. Oh no, but you did this. We simply didn't have a situation where the ANC quietly accepted the loss of power, and the EFF were, a very cooperative partner in the initial arrangement. Of course, the DA made mistakes as well, and we've got to take responsibility for that. Since 2021, our coalition does have a majority in the municipal council. Since that time, ActionSA has been part of government. They now have a deputy mayor. They have key portfolios of economic and social development and city planning. Their MMCs have got oversight in townships such as Mabopane, Winterveld, Soshanguve, Ga-Rankuwa, Hammanskraal. And so when there is credit to be taken, we must take it jointly. When there's criticism to be taken, we must also share that. We are in a period of time where becoming a part of a dominant party democracy or a dominant party is reshaping our politics. We have to figure out how to make coalitions work. Of course, we've made mistakes, but being in the future business, it's about taking responsibility for fixing this. And I think this we have done in our coalition.
The DA goes to its national or federal gathering about once every 3 years, which would take us to 2026 or in and around that time when the DA may be thinking about its next leadership cohort. Would you be interested in a higher leadership role within the DA itself? I've seen your name bandied about as a potential future leader. Is that something that you're considering at the moment?
No. It's a simple answer. I mean, what's the headline going to be? Beleaguered DA mayor wants to be the leader. No, I am passionate about fixing this city, about keeping our original promise in 2016 to make things better. It is incredibly difficult to govern in Gauteng. Essence of our problem is that the economy hasn't kept pace with the growth of the population. That's inward migration largely. It's put a strain on our infrastructure. It's led to the development of many, many more informal settlements than we had a decade ago. COVID lockdown made all of that worse. There's a question about the financial sustainability of municipalities under this current model. But it is an incredible challenge to govern a city and to try and overcome these challenges by improving your administration, by essentially making sure that at City Hall, you've got your things in order. My hypothesis is we can do it. It will depend to a large degree on the finances. But at this point in my life, even as I face motions of no confidence and abandoning coalition partners, I would very much like to do something historical in the capital city. And I'm certainly not thinking of a very ungrateful, perhaps even a more difficult job than this would be to be the leader of the DA.
Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel. So why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. Just as we conclude, just want to touch on a theme of the national level. Do you define this as a government of national unity or a grand coalition?
Does it matter?
I think it does. Because I think that, well, Helen Zille tells us that it carries a certain political capital for the ANC to characterize this as a government of national unity. Now, I mean, those remarks may have been taken out of context, but I wonder how you characterize what's going on at the national level.
You know, if it made it easier for the ANC to call it a government of national unity, I haven't thought much about the tags of it. I suppose you can call it a grand coalition. Strictly speaking, government of national unity, what I have in my mind is the 93 interim constitution, which was the constitutional arrangement. So whatever you call it, I think in essence it is a grand coalition. And if the ANC and other parties feel that it could strengthen that government by having others at the table as well, that's a significant political consideration. And we should take hands to make the best of it.
And are you happy with the DA's decision? I mean, in some ways, it's been fantastic for the party to the extent that it now has an opportunity to show what it can do at the highest levels. But the ANC is an old foe, and if there's my view is the ANC doesn't really know what to do when it gets power, but it's very good at getting power. And there's also a view that, well, the ANC has actually out-negotiated the DA here and relegated you to relatively fewer positions than you actually do. A few months into this, how are you feeling about the way that this coalition has panned out?
I don't think the decision to go into a government of national unity was obvious at the outset. And there were internal party debates about it. The risk, obviously, is that the ANC thinks that it can continue where it left off before the election.
Yeah.
Keep the president, keep the status quo, and you sort of just plug the DA in there and continue with the current policy agenda and continue with policies that the DA does believe to be disastrous to the future of the country. So I think there was a lot of debate and introspection of the party, and the election promise by the DA, rescue South Africa, is certainly not kept, mission accomplished, by simply stepping into the government of national unity and filling a space that the EFF or the MK could fill. But I do think it's significant. There's a lot of expectations from the business community, from folks who want South Africa to do well, to grow the middle class, to continue a trajectory of development. There's a lot of expectation that the DA will make a difference. But the key test is going to be not just keeping the anti-constitutionalists out, the doomsday coalition, but can we make a difference? And that measure, to me, is economic growth. We must grow the economy. That is the only way that we'll relieve the pressures on the state, on society. Of course, then you've got to ask, are we going to have energy to sustain economic growth? Because 2% economic growth, we're back to load shedding. So many things have to happen, but I feel a sense of optimism, perhaps a bit of, fair bit of skepticism. I'm not a Pollyanna about these things by no stretch of the imagination. But in politics, you've got to ask, what are your options at a particular point in time? And I think the DA has made the right choices. How we will deal with when it comes to changing policy, and if that cannot be resolved, then obviously the government of national unity would be at risk. But let's see how it goes.
What have you learned in the office of mayor that you didn't know before?
I'd say the importance of communication. I had a very nuts and bolts portfolio when Salim Simanga was the mayor and I was in corporate and shared services, fleet, ICT, legal services, lots of time in the office, beavering away. And being an executive mayor is a public-facing portfolio, obviously, and the realization that you cannot govern if you do not communicate. And you can't communicate in a way that avoids the bad stuff and the bad news and then only focus on what you can deliver. You have to take the public with you and say, we're in a terrible financial situation. We can't do this right now, but these are the plans we're making in order to improve service delivery over time. I think we've done that relatively well. I have the benefit of a very strong mayoral committee, probably the strongest that the city has ever had. And that includes the leaders of other parties, not just the DA folk. So that, plus I would say the importance of personal relationships. And I'll even say that after this ActionSA betrayal. Because if you can't build those relationships and the only thing you're going on is black on white agreements, then you simply don't have that covering fire when things become difficult. You can't pick up the phone and say, hey, Nasipi, what's going on? Hey, Grundy, is this going to be a problem for us? So trying to build those relationships and a sense of a connection as human beings, not just as political agents. Yeah.
Well, Mayor Cilliers Brink, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX. It was great to host you.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Like, share, subscribe, and help us get to 150,000 subscribers by the end of this month. Aye.